Okay, let's see how we're doing on audio levels here. Seems like everything's good. All right, folks, how's it going today? We are doing a little bit of a chill stream today, just since I am not since I am not I'm a little rusty at the moment. It's been sort of a full 2 weeks here, and I'm gonna have some just gonna have some fun exploring a little bit today. A couple of things I wanted to cover and learn a little bit about. Just check my audio levels here as well. Alright, I think we're good. So I only have the one monitor again because I was a goofball and left my adapter at the studio again. It happens a lot. How's it going, folks? Ah, shoot, I left my closet open. Give me 1 sec to close that. Alright, it's sort of an overcast, slightly chilly day here in Los Angeles. So the lighting isn't great. And I've been adjusting the sort of the color grade on my camera and all. It's never gonna be a great camera. Uh, just sort of given how laptop cameras be, right? So we're doing our best. But yeah. Mm, Adjust that framing a little bit. So what's it gonna be today? Well, it's gonna be a little bit rambly. I don't think there's gonna be anybody really in the chat at the moment, so I'm just gonna sort of go over some things and get some thoughts off the dome. Um, I'm thinking a lot about where this channel is going, or what the project is basically, and yeah, there's not going to be too much crazy stuff happening for the next few weeks or so, but in about a month or two, I'm going to be in a position where I'll probably be able to stream a lot more. Be able to stream a lot more this summer, hopefully. So I'm going to be putting together some bigger projects then. Uh, and in the meantime, yeah, I'm taking this as sort of an opportunity to work through some of my thoughts about the format and the goals of this channel, and just sort of get some practice in with my setup and all. Because yeah, when I start doing some more ambitious stuff over the summer, I would love to have this aspect of streaming in general kind of settled, right? I don't want to be sort of looking for hotkeys and struggling to set stuff up or struggling with my audio or like, oh, what should we be doing right now? You got to get into the flow of it, right? And this is definitely something that I'm a little new doing this sort of thing. Um, but it's getting more comfortable by the day, and it's definitely a lot of fun. Um, and there's a lot to do, a lot to explore. It's a lot easier for me at the moment than doing like a pre-edited video or video essay or something like that, or tutorial, whatever. Um, but ultimately, that is where I'm going as well, right? So there will be essay content and tutorial content from me in the future at some point. It might not be for a little bit still. I'm still kind of figuring out what I can commit to on this channel in terms of time. As I've mentioned in the past, I am a grad student, so there are other things in life that definitely demand time and attention from me. Um, but yeah, this is a project that will layer into that very well, and as it grows and as I sort of figure it out, um, it'll get better. It'll get better. It'll be more. More stuff to do, more things to learn. Let me just check in with my audio again real quick to make sure that we're still good. If you see me do this, I've got the stream going on my phone and I'm checking my audio here. It's on a bit of a delay on the phone, so I can check, make sure my audio is syncing okay. Cool. So, to start off with, in a previous stream, we spent some time listening to Nietzsche on LibriVox. And I want to do something similar, but I don't have a book lined up to actually listen to at the moment. There are some ideas specifically that I want to start exploring. Okay. And this is tying in a little bit with our overall goals on this channel. Let me pull up a web browser and let's see. Let's just auto snapping in Windows can be a little irritating coming from one monitor to the next. It'll try to auto snap it like that all the time. It's a little crazy. So to begin with today, there's this book called Foreverism. I don't have a copy of it currently, but I heard about this book recently, and I want to learn a little bit about the book and its author and where it's coming from, and I want to see if I can find a sample that we can read through real quick. There's some interesting concepts in here, from my understanding, just relating to media and culture and nostalgia and so forth, and there's a lot of overlap with the type of things that I do as well. Let me see. I can't reposition the camera a little bit. A bit more. Okay. I see. The orientation of the camera is a little tricky to lock in sometimes, so I'm just gonna rearrange things a little bit on the desk so it's easier for me to see what I'm doing and not have my face blocked by this little window here. If I need to reposition that, I will. Okay. So, Grafton Tanner Foreverism. This looks like a preview, so I'll pop that open and take a look in just a second. And let's learn a little bit about Grafton Tanner as well. Fairly young looking guy. I guess makes sense if he's this book is recent and a lot of the concepts are recent. American author and academic, focuses on big tech nostalgia, neoliberalism, and education. These sound like subjects that we're very interested in here. Maybe Grafton Tanner is gonna make an appearance more than once over here. That sounds cool. Let's see what he's done so far. His Wikipedia page is fairly short. He does have his own website, so we'll take a glance at that in a second. It states that artificial intelligence models like ChatGPT embody the cultural malaise of tautology, as machines can only artificially replicate human nostalgia and societal attitudes. Sounds like this guy is, generally speaking, well educated. Limited term instructor at University of Georgia's Department of Communications. Cool, so he's actually like proper academic. I bet he's published some papers then as well. It'd be nice to see in a second. Let's go to his website. Foreverismo. Looks like his work's been translated. Good for him. About author of Foreverism. The hours have lost their clock. Politics of nostalgia. Interesting. So he's been on this subject of nostalgia for a bit. The Circle of the Snake. Nostalgia and utopia in the age of big tech. The Babbling Corpse. Vaporwave and commodification of ghosts. Sounds like some very interesting titles, very provocative titles. And this is basically just sort of telling us what we saw in the Wikipedia. The host of Delusioneering, a 3-episode audio series about the myths of capitalism. Currently he's writing a book on the reemergence of exorcism in the late 20th century. Interesting subject matter. Interesting stuff that he writes about. So, okay, books. He's actually, looks like he's written a lot, which is encouraging to me. Sometimes people write a lot and they don't have a lot to say, per se, but it seems like our guy Grafton Tanner over here has really done some due diligence in this field. You can't really judge a book by its cover at the end of the day, you know what I mean? So we're gonna take a look inside some of these books as much as we can, because I really want to know where he's at, and then we might see if we can find an interview with him as well. This seems like really interesting work. Oh, excellent. He's got a list of articles on his website. Jacobin, they're a cool publication. I've seen some of his stuff before and liked it. He's been around, published in a lot of different. Yeah, we got the Los Angeles Review of Books, Merriam West, The Nation. I don't know all these publications, but he definitely gets out there. And he also even links to some Scorsese was wrong about Marvel movies. They're infinite games. Y'all, how can I not? Okay. And we got some interviews with him. Okay, word. I mean, I appreciate that, yeah, just make your work itself accessible to people, right? I would like to know a little more about his bio and his background. Maybe he goes into some of it in some of these interviews, but it seems like he's like the earliest work of his that I'm seeing here is like from 2016. So like, is that like when he graduated, or is that like? Because he might be like he looks like, I'm not gonna lie, he looks like he's like my age, you know. So like, there's some chance that yeah, like I graduated in 2015. Um, what do we got here? Martin Scorsese, Gutter Space, 6 minutes. You know what? Why not? Why not? Let's take a look at this one. Let me put it up in large scale for us here. And let me pause our music as well so that we can just hear this.
Acclaimed filmmaker Martin Scorsese aroused controversy in 2019 when he called Marvel films theme parks and not cinema in an interview with Empire. After being publicly flogged by Marvel fans on social media,
Maybe fuck yourself.
Scorsese explained what he meant and elaborated on the dangers Marvel films pose to the future of cinema.
Okay, so we're probably gonna want to go check out some of Scorsese's comments on this subject. This was an interesting discussion. I remember seeing some of this when it was happening, but I wasn't, following it super closely at the time. Um, like Martin Scorsese is a brilliant filmmaker, known for being a little bit of a curmudgeon sometimes, known for being a bit of a, I guess some people might say a purist. I don't know if that's the fairest way to characterize someone like Scorsese. Um, but he definitely cares very deeply about filmmaking as an art form, which I respect a lot because there's a lot of folks out there. You can disagree with a Scorsese on how he feels about the medium, but I don't think it's at all fair to sort of dismiss his concerns out of hand, first of all, and also I think someone like Scorsese is trying to hold on to something that's very important in filmmaking and something that I think, indisputably we've lost touch with in our current moment in terms of how the broader film industry is structured these days, the sorts of films that get made in Hollywood, in mainstream filmmaking. Um, yeah, there's a lot to critique there, and you can disagree perhaps with his critique, but I would say that the fundamental thing that he's responding to is real. And, if you care about filmmaking, if you care about art, then I would hope you would have your own sort of interpretation of that to come back at Scorsese with. A lot of folks, I think, tend to respond to folks like Scorsese, folks like Miyazaki. We talked about Miyazaki earlier. Um, these old farts are just being cynical, they hate fun, whatever. And that's really not the essence of what they're saying. And pay attention to the movies that they make, Like Scorsese has made some of the most just awesome films in history, some of the most fun movies that you could go watch. And in fact, we might have to pull up a little bit of bio on Scorsese because I think a lot of folks, they might know someone like Scorsese exists. They might have heard his name a couple of times, right? But if you're not a big movie nerd, you might not know who this is, and it's worth knowing who this guy really is. Um, but without getting too distracted, let's press on because I'm interested in hearing um, if this is Grafton Tanner's response to Scorsese. In fact, let me back out and see what is this channel even? Is this like Grafton Tanner's channel or I guess they're like more of a hmm, they have not done a whole lot of stuff. Yeah, I wonder if this is him or like associate with him directly. I don't know. We'll try to learn a little bit more there too. In the meantime, let's press on.
Cinema.
My observation is that uh, the filmmakers of substance need support. And the problem is the amusement park films. Now, I think, in effect, they've got real cinema on the run.
Scorsese is wrong, but not for the reasons you might expect.
All right, so there's our framing. We're gonna disagree with Martin Scorsese. He's wrong about something, but not in the way you might expect. So the question then becomes, all right, what's the critique gonna be? And let's sort of before we dive into the critique, let's make sure we understand the setup, right? He's specifically honing in on um, Scorsese's critique of modern films, I guess like Hollywood, like Marvel movies especially. Like Marvel movies are kind of like the epicenter of this, or like I'm not sure if we would say that critique is limited to Marvel movies. I don't think it is, but Marvel movies definitely seem particularly exemplary of the thing that Scorsese wants to critique in filmmaking. And the thing that Scorsese is saying he uses this idea of an amusement park that they're amusement park films, right? That's what he calls them. Um, And like I kind of want to go into Scorsese's thing and see if we can break down his critique a little bit more and make sure that we really understand it. Um, but so far this seems like a fair enough sort of summation of what Scorsese's feelings towards these films are. We're probably going to get a little bit more detail. I hope we're going to get a little bit more detail. Um, and we're also going to see if that critique or that characterization of is it modern Hollywood cinema, is it Marvel cinema specifically, that it is amusement park like, right? And what specifically does that mean? All right, so that's where we're starting from. That's sort of Scorsese's view that modern cinema is like an amusement park in some meaningful way, and that filmmakers of substance, as Scorsese says, are in need of support and perhaps are not getting the support that they need, in part because of this type of amusement park cinema being seen as the more um, financially fruitful option. Um, I think that's basically his critique or the statement that he's making here. But let's see if this video elaborates a little more on that.
Marvel films aren't theme parks, and they aren't cinema either. They're more
Okay, so that's the angle we're taking. His characterization is incorrect.
like role-playing games produced by
Mm,
corporations in which
mm,
fans are invited to participate.
mm.
It's a very different.
I think I can see where he's starting to go with this, and I think this is an interesting interpretation. Um, because I think he's probably gonna start talking about the larger sort of structure around Marvel movies. Um, I'm not sure that this is gonna necessarily totally undermine what Scorsese is saying. I If I'm right about where he's going with this, it might be more of like a kind of expansion on or addition to what Scorsese is saying, or sort of a refinement of what Scorsese is saying, but not really a fundamental disagreement. But let's see where we go.
Different presentist approach to problems where we move. It's a very different presentist approach to to problems where we move through media much more like a video game, in real time, first person, choice to choice to choice to choice.
In his
I know that guy. Oh, Douglas Rushkoff. Yeah, I've heard of Douglas Rushkoff before. I don't remember in what context, but I guess we're about to find out. He's going to talk about Douglas Rushkoff. Um, yeah, this is an interesting thing overall. We got to talk about gaming and games specifically at some point because I think the way that games work as a type of media and the way that they're designed and developed is very different from cinema, from films. Um, but also there's a lot of overlap, and I think that there's a very interesting analysis to be done of the games industry overall and how it's developed, and sort of how games work as an art form or an expression of art. I'm not even sure. Yeah, no, I'm not going to drop any hot takes on games just yet, but this is interesting. This is a vibe. Okay, let's get
Like a
into
video
more of
game,
this.
in real time, first person, choice to choice to choice to choice.
In his 2013 book Present Shock, Douglas Rushkoff pointed out that the digital age had destroyed the idea of traditional narrative, and that role-playing games, or RPGs, were taking its place. From Dungeons and Dragons to World of Warcraft, these infinite games allow players to play indefinitely with no end, no winners or losers.
All right, so games supplanting the idea of traditional narratives. I think there's something very true about that. But it might be I'm not sure if is it fully like a supplanting of, or is it a context thing, right? Like we could probably talk a lot about like how narrative functions in games, right? There's some really interesting stuff to look into there. There's some great books on the subject, great research on the subject, great papers on the subject, and a lot of like really approachable stuff too, So it's gonna be worth. I think this is gonna be worth expanding out as a theme for future research on this channel because yeah, I think there is a meaningful shift that has happened as a result of digital technology allowing us to frame and tell stories in different ways, and that has implications for our culture that are fairly new, fairly unique. I'm not sure to what extent it's like a fundamentally new thing or to what extent it's these tools reframing things that have sort of always existed in human culture, right? I think there's an argument that there's always been some degree of interactivity built in to the way that we interact with culture, right? Um, broadly, there might be some sort of um, shall we say, ludic component to use a fucking $5 word right there, a game-like component to culture inherently. Um, and are we are we adding something new? Are we reframing things that have been around for a while? There's rich questions, and I'm really fascinated. Yeah, I guess so. We're at this video because it was linked off of Grafton Tanner's website. We're hearing someone just sort of like speak through and explain a concept. I feel like this is probably him, right? And we'll see if we can find an interview and um. But yeah. If this is you straight up like delivering your take, my guy Grafton Tanner, um, I have to say, loving the video first of all. Well edited, concise, interesting concepts, and it makes me want to learn more about your work and the various subjects and characters involved. So, in my book, that's a good video. Let's get the rest of this.
role playing isn't limited to video games or tabletop games anymore. Gamification, the process of turning something into a game, has spread throughout society, from culture to politics.
This is very true.
A cinematic universe like the Marvel films is a kind of infinite game where fans can play together. A good Marvel or Star Wars fan will criticize and debate plot points on podcasts and YouTube channels. They'll dress up as characters at conventions.
Can I say, by the way, I fucking called it. I knew exactly where he was going with this. This is a very interesting and I think good take. Um, yeah, yeah. I'm not sure I have like the complete background to really like pick apart every component of what you're saying here, but I'm paying attention and this is interesting and I think there's a lot of validity to how you're breaking this down. Um, I'm gonna give a little bit more of like my thoughts once we get through the end of this.
And hunt for the Easter eggs scattered throughout the movies. And franchise movies will provide fans with backstories, side plots, and recurring characters in return. These films are interactive, like games, and seemingly infinite, whereas a theme park has boundaries. Although wealthy Disney fans can purchase million-dollar homes to live inside Walt Disney World, most park goers must exit the gate at some point. Franchise films, on the other hand, seemingly have no end. They're so expansive that fans refer to them
Okay.
collectively as universes.
That's actually like a cool because that connects back to Scorsese's critique, right? He's basically roping us back in, saying like, remember, Scorsese was saying that these films are like amusement parks, and what he's saying here is that, well, actually, amusement parks are too restricted of a concept, right? Like the companies themselves are probably thinking more in these terms as well, right? Like, how do we expand this beyond the amusement park? How do we make this integrated with how people are just sort of going about in the world and living their lives, right? Uh,
But a cinematic universe is just a euphemism for a franchise.
yep.
Another example of an infinite game is QAnon, the conspiracy theory that spread during Donald Trump's
Dang, I didn't see that one coming, but yeah, okay. Dope take, Mike. Yeah, yeah, no, I appreciate this connection. You're going in a cool direction with this because this is gonna get us to a lot of other stuff. And shoot, there's a book. No, I don't have it in here. I'm gonna have to go looking for it. There's a book. I forget what it's called. I was reading it years ago. Playing in Reality. No, that's a different book. That's also a good book. Okay. No, we're gonna. I want to see where he's taking us. All right, let's see. Let's see. Let's see. Let's see. Rope it all together. Okay, we're doing QAnon. We're doing Marvel movies. We're doing amusement parks. We were just on Scorsese. We are 3 minutes into this. This is this, and I don't feel. And also, another sort of green flag for me with this right now. I don't feel like this is just arbitrary kitchen sink. Let's just sort of throw in everything, right? I think the QAnon tie-in here is going to make a lot of sense. It's going to make a lot of sense. Okay. We could probably make some other connections with this type of thinking. So let's keep going.
presidency. QAnon theorists believe that a secret cabal of sex trafficking Democrats was constantly undermining Trump in office, and that they stole the election from him in 2020. Critics have noted that QAnon is kind of like a role-playing game, although one that has occasionally spilled over into real life.
I would be interested to see because I can imagine how that works. Right. I can imagine how that works. But I'd be interested to see in some more detail, like specifically what are the characteristics that we're seeing the kind of interchange between QAnon and role playing as a practice. Because role playing is also there's a lot of layers to role playing, like are we talking Dungeons and Dragons? Are we talking, you know, what is it, Final Fantasy? Are we talking like Like, are we talking cosplaying? Are we talking LARPing, right? Like, there's a lot of different ways in which role playing is expressed and practiced, right? And I imagine that, you know, like, and I guess like what I'm wondering is, do we think that the relationship between QAnon and role playing is just based on kind of like similarities between some of the like external practices, right? Like the things that you do when you're playing a role-playing game. You might go on like an Easter egg hunt or something like that. Um you might create a character that you dress up as or make images of. You might meet together with a group of friends and like sort of decide on a sequence of actions together. There's a lot of different things that could be um, that are just sort of behaviors, right? That could be common between QAnon and role playing, right? But I guess what's almost more interesting for me to think about is, are there like more fundamental mechanical overlaps between QAnon and role playing? I imagine we'll touch on some of this here, but yeah, no, that's a question on my mind.
The storming of the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021, was a brief moment when the players of the QAnon game tried to beat the game once and for all. QAnon promised an end to the game in the form of the storm, the day of reckoning when Trump would win big, as he promised, and assume the throne forever. For QAnon players, winning the game would mean ending the tension and fighting between Trump and anyone standing in his way.
Hmm. See, I'm not sure how the idea of goals is factoring into this, because at least as I understand it, I don't think of role playing in terms of a goal per se. I think of role playing more in terms of the activity itself being the goal, um, and that it's almost like the most sort of like pure and fundamental forms of role playing, right? Like pencil and paper D&D with your homies, or like you doing some kind of like LARPing or something like that, right? Live action role playing. Uh, those types of games, like you kind of don't want them to end, you know? Like people play campaigns that go on for years and years and years, and like the game really just sort of becomes like a ritual, a recurring activity that you keep coming back to as like a way of connecting with your friends and spending good time in the evening and telling some good stories and enjoying some drinks and snacks or whatever. Um, like I don't really think so. Like the storm, is the storm even like a goal in that way, right? Because I think the role playing analog is a good one, but I feel like the storm isn't like it's not a goal in the way like beating the game, I don't think. Like maybe it is in a certain sense, right? But it's more like a season finale. I think like people and this is also I think what gets tricky about this, right? Because it's not just the case that cinema is adopting ideas and practices from games. It's also very much the case that games are adopting a lot from cinema and always have. And so a lot of cinema will then adopt things from games that in turn adopted things from cinema. So there's like a sort of like cross-pollination of practices and ideas and symbols and concepts and so forth that go into both cinema and games. Um, and I think it can be hard sometimes to even really pin down what is what, right? So like the storm, for example. Um, is a concept in QAnon. It's been a concept floating around like far right circles for a long time. A lot of like kind of neo-Nazi types have been fascinated with something akin to the storm for a while, right? Um, it has religious s- analogies kind of built into it as well, right? Um, something like that as like a, I'm not sure something like that functions the same way as like a goal in like a sport, when you're playing a sport and you have the goal of like, you know, capturing the hill or putting the ball in the hoop or traversing a certain number of miles or completing a track or something like that. Um, like there's a specific task that you're trying to complete that's difficult to complete, right? And for the most part, that's sort of like what the what that kind of game is, right? Uh, with something like role playing, I'm not sure you're trying to complete a task so much as engage in tasks more broadly, or sort of like there's a lot of different things you do or could do. You could kind of do anything when you're role playing. That's a lot of the fun of it, right? Is that like there isn't so much a fixed goal per se, but there are still sort of rules that frame things. And I think a lot of times, like there's a book, uh, The Grasshopper, this one, this book, right? It's a very interesting book. And yeah, he talks in here about like the adoption of rules. It might even be summarized on the back here. Let's see. In the mid 20th century, philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein famously asserted that games are indefinable. There are no common threads that link them all. Nonsense, said the sensible Bernard Suits. Playing a game is a voluntary attempt to overcome unnecessary obstacles. So I think that's one of the concepts that Bernard Suits talks about in this book is the idea that, and I find this compelling, that we play games, or that to play a game is to impose unnecessary restrictions on your activity, right? Rules, essentially. And the reason why you do this is because those rules impose, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here. I'm not using his exact language. We can go into Bernard Seats at some point. But we adopt these rules. We allow these rules to be imposed upon us, or we impose these rules on ourselves, or what have you, um, because they condition our activity, right? So like normally in life, if I'm trying to get from like one place to another, I just walk over there. But as soon as I say like, oh, I have to get from here to there within a certain amount of time, or by means of a certain path, or using a specific tool, right? Like I have to get over there with like a flour sack around my feet and I have to hop, right? Now it's a game, right? Because I've imposed restrictions or conditions on my activity that make a new kind of activity possible, right? In other words, it wouldn't be possible to do the thing, to play the game without imposing some rules on yourself. The rules define the game, right? Uh, and I think that's a more powerful and general way of looking at a game, especially something like a role-playing game, than getting too hung up on their goals, right? So like I think like yeah, and I'm not sure I'm really disagreeing with the video here. I'm not sure that talking about the storm and goal making really supports the basic argument that's being made, which I think is a good argument, which is that QAnon is game-like, right? QAnon is role-playing game-like, right? Um, I just don't. I'm not convinced that goal making supports that claim, um, one way or another. But I do think that there's a lot that does support that claim. We'll see if he touches on that more here. I'm gonna go back a little bit just because I want to make sure we heard him correctly and I talked for a minute here. So
The U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021, was a brief moment when the players of the QAnon game tried to beat the game once and for all. QAnon promised an end to the game in the form of the Storm, the day of reckoning when Trump would win big, as he promised, and a
Yeah, I'm not sure QAnon was really promising an end to the game. I'm not sure that January 6th was an attempt to beat the game per se. It might have just been more like a very large convention. Like a little bit of a LAN party, if you know what I mean.
assume the throne forever. For QAnon players, winning the game would mean ending the tension and fighting between Trump and anyone standing in his way.
Winning the game for them would also mean they don't get to play anymore, right? But they're not going to stop playing, is the thing. Okay, and that's like that. People say this about fascism a lot, right? That like fascism requires a state of sort of constant hysteria, constant frenzy, constant paranoia, right? These guys are in a game where they're hyped up on a vibe, you know what I mean? And like they don't really want to get off that vibe because the people setting up the game and sort of constructing the rules of this game, the way that a game like this functions, right? Because I think it is ultimately a kind of a fascist game. It doesn't really want you out of the game. It wants you addicted. Like there's no way to beat this game any more than there's a way to beat Candy Crush, right? Like you can get a high score, you can get a good run, you could be a top player, you can get a trophy. But that's not beating the game, right? You can't just like put it down and walk away, right? And the game doesn't want you to put it down and walk away. The game is constructed in a way that's designed to keep you in it. And I think I think that's more how something like QAnon functions if we are to look at it as a kind of game.
No more bosses or levels, no more opposition, only infinite right-wing rule.
See, not no more bosses or levels. You just want to flow through them all. Okay? You want to be able to keep playing the game, right? You want it to keep being fun, and you want to keep beating down your opposition, but you just want to do that forever, right? There's a Power Rangers anime that came out recently. I didn't get the chance to watch it yet, but I thought it was an interesting premise. Because the premise of this Power Rangers spin-off anime is that the Power Rangers are actually evil in this world, and they've kind of constructed this arena wherein all of the alien monsters that they battle every week are actually like captured POWs or something like that, who are being sent to this arena for the Power Rangers to like kind of beat down regularly and uh, use as like kind of a propaganda tool to maintain their tight grip on society, right? A lot of shows have played around with this idea. It comes up quite a bit, right? Um, this idea of like the kind of the spectacle and the game as a means of control, and the way that you can use the perception of an enemy or the sort of the construction of an enemy, and things like games and sport can be a great way to construct an enemy. Um, that kind of keeps people engaged and interested in what's going on, right? It's why fascists like to start wars all the time. You know what I mean? Um, damn, this is a good video. As you can tell, I might have a slightly different interpretation of some things. That might just be me not totally understanding the point that he's making. Um, but this is solid, man. This is solid.
They thought they were bounded within a finite game, when really they were playing a game without end.
Oh my God.
The
Oh
late
fuck. He's talking about the infinite game. So he's gonna just like make my point now and then like bring it all back around at the end. Goddamn. And now he's dropping some David Graeber. Last like out of nowhere, fucking flying into the ring. The G, David Graeber, gonna freaking body us on fucking bullshit jobs. What do you know about bullshit jobs? David Graeber will explain bullshit jobs to you, my guy. Holy cow. This is good. I'm rocking out.
David Graeber said that our lives today are like video games. Nothing is actually produced. It just kind of springs into being, and we really do spend our lives earning points and dodging people carrying weapons. Of course, no game is truly infinite, and most people want a game to end at some point. As Byung-Chul Han wrote,
We do. Players get tired. This is why games get shitty after a certain point. That's why there ain't nobody on the EverQuest servers no more.
to end at some point. As Byung-Chul Han wrote, true happiness comes from what runs riot, lets go, is exuberant, and loses meaning. As a means of production, gamification is destroying play's potential to set free.
Okay, that was abstract. We can go back to this Byung-Chul Han. True happiness comes from what runs riot, lets go, is exuberant, and loses meaning. That's interesting. That's very interesting. That ties in to the idea, what is play? There's a We're gonna look at this afterwards once we finish this video. Let me pull this up. Article from 2014. Yeah. Yeah, we're not gonna it's a bit of a long one, but there's some cool stuff in this article. We'll take a look at this in a minute once we're done with the video, right? This is from the Baffler. I remember coming across this, and it's by y'all. I forgot. I forgot this is by David Graeber. Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, we're gonna take a look at this because this is a very interesting article. All animals play, even ants. So let's just keep that aside. We'll come back to that in a second.
Lets go, is exuberant, and loses meaning. As a means of production, gamification is destroying play's potential to set free.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. There's a lot to think about there. Essentially, what Young Chul Ho is saying, and it ties into that article from the Baffler. Um, Arbitrary, and this is kind of there in the burned suits also. Arbitrary, right, is kind of inherent to game playing, right? Like a big part of the point is that the rules of the game are arbitrary rules. You don't have to follow those rules. The only reason why you're following those rules is because it makes the game possible, right? The only reason why you're following the rules is because it makes it possible to play. Okay? And something that it's there in the Graeber article. Um, it's there in the Byung-Chul Ho quote, right? Like that idea of the loss of meaning there, right? True happiness. True happiness comes from what runs riot, lets go, is exuberant, right? An expenditure of energy, burning calories, making crazy structures, little sculptures, putting weird markings on your face and big feathery crests or whatever, screaming and shouting, throwing shit, And why? Just cause. Just cause. Because it's dope, because it's fun, because it's a blast. There's no meaning to it. The meaning comes after the fact. The meaning we can worry about later. The sheer activity of just doing shit, just making something because you can, right? Is central to why not just humans, but all life forms play. Okay? It's baked into how organic life works. We just burn calories sometimes for no goddamn reason, and we like doing it, right? We just do shit. We just like doing it. You know? We're not just like calculating all the time. Like what's the most sort of efficient use of my resources at any time to satisfy a specific goal or whatever, right? Um, there's a whole component to just being alive that involves waste. This gets into another philosopher I really like, and we got to spend some time with this guy, George Bataille. Okay, there's oh man, we could talk about sacrifice at this point. We could talk about the accursed share. We could start talking about the accursed share at this point, like the connection is right around the corner, right? Just a couple more steps and we're there. Um, but why this leads to gamification is
It's
destroying
destroying
play's potential to set free. Okay, what he's talking about specifically there is the implementation of games, implementation of play, the use of play as a means to an end, the end being the production of profit. The production of commodities, the generation of capital ultimately for shareholders, right? That kind of thing. It undermines that central arbitrary just because we can aspect of playing anything, right? It's there's a fundamental tension there, a fundamental contradiction there, that the reason why we engage in this activity at all is incompatible with the reason why companies might want you to engage in that activity, right? There's something about our nature, but like when we know that there's like, oh yeah, this is part of a job now. It's not a game anymore. Like it kind of stops being a game. It kind of stops functioning the way that games function in like a sort of individual and social context. Holy cow, this is great. This is great. I don't think I'm gonna take back what I was saying earlier about goals and all of that. We'll see where he brings us to by the end. Um, I'm still not totally sure how that bit of the video plugs in, but overall, I'm loving this.
potential to set free. Nearly every part of our life today is gamified, from our social relations to our careers. It is the result of a world surrendered to productive entertainment, like film franchises and conspiracy theories, in which
Hmm.
consumers hunt Easter eggs and hidden clues, searching for an answer. You might play along in a theme park, but only in a game where you make
Wow, wow, wow.
choices that affect your experience and perhaps the experience of others. Until the day the game is finally over, players will switch from first-person shooters to RPGs, from drone simulators to God games, hoping to win big. But there is no game, and there is no end. Democracy cannot survive as a game, because if someone beats it, the game is over.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I like that way of putting it. Democracy can't survive as a game because if someone beats it, the game is over. I mean, I think in a certain way, and certainly if we sort of take the Bernard Suits reading of a game, like democracy, well, first of all, democracy might be a game. It might be a game. That might be a fair way of describing democracy. Maybe not, maybe not, but I think you could, I could see someone making that argument. Um, but then also, if it's a game, not all games can be beat in that way. And we were just talking about role-playing games, and I think this is why this is significant. Okay, so yeah, my slightly different read here is coming back. Um, because there are types of games, especially role-playing games, where beating the game isn't really the point. There isn't really a way to beat Dungeons and Dragons. You can't win Dungeons and Dragons, you know? And like video games are different because you can't have infinitely generative software the way that human beings can be endlessly creative in conversation with each other. Um, there's no way to have that kind of conversation, that kind of discourse with a machine. And discourse is the fundamental thing that makes an RPG like Dungeons and Dragons work, right? It's essentially a gamified conversation. The structure around a conversation that allows you to have a certain kind of conversation with a group of people. Um, that's the whole game there. And I think that if we think about democracy as that kind of a game, then, like first of all, I don't, I'm not sure that that's a problematic way to think about democracy. Um, and second of all, I don't think that it's the sort of thing that could be beat, right? It could be broken, right? Like you can break a game of Dungeons and Dragons. You can ruin a game of Dungeons and Dragons. Right. Especially if you're coming into the game with a bad attitude. And honestly, one of the biggest ways to ruin a game of Dungeons and Dragons is to treat it as a competitive game where there is like a winner and a loser and you need to be the winner. Right? Like if you ever played Dungeons and Dragons, if there's that one guy in the game who just always has to be the coolest, or always has to get all the treasure, or whose character can never be allowed to take any damage, it can ruin the game, man. Like so goddamn fast, right? Uh, so I think I don't know. I don't know. I'm not sure if this is I'm not sure if this is the takeaway that I would have from this whole conversation. Nice editing. Oh, written and edited by Grafton Tanner. Excellent. Great. So that was indeed Grafton Tanner speaking to us. That was a good video. I liked it a lot. Um, and in fact, why don't I show my man some flowers? He doesn't have many. Thank you for putting that out there for us. All right, all right. So there's a lot more from Grafton Tanner that we could go over. I do think, yeah. So I'm not sure if, yeah, let me go over some of the stuff in Foreverism. Um, and then we got might kind of wrap it up. Yeah, so let me just sort of like summarize then where I'm at um with this take. And also, let me set up. I think this Graeber article is going to be fun. It's going to be fun to look at this in a second. Um, yeah. So there's a whole question about games and how games fit into our culture and our society today, right? And I think it's a really important question. It's a really important subject to explore because it is clearly very much there. Right? A lot of the thinking from game design and video games and digital arts and so forth has just been sort of diffused throughout our whole society at this point and is impacting pretty much everything. Business, politics, economics, sociology, mental health, a lot of different subjects get tied in with this. And if you're the sort of person who makes this kind of artwork, if you're in digital arts, if you're in this kind of industry, if you're making films, if you're making games, you're thinking about this sort of thing, right? You're absolutely thinking about this sort of thing. But here's the other thing. You might actually end up knowing a lot more about this stuff than you realize, right? Because a lot of this type of thinking is fairly new. There aren't that like if you look like prior to the 20th century, there's virtually no serious academic work written on games. I've looked. Like there's very, very little material that you can find in terms of like sociology, philosophy, science or whatever, like there are probably fewer books written or like even like essays or whatever exploring things like in games or sport or anything kind of even associated with that. Um, Less of that material, like from the whole history of humanity, than just from like the 20th century alone, right? Like most of the thinking that people have done seriously on this kind of subject is fairly new and relies a lot on, a lot of our more kind of modern concepts. But games are very old, and this David Graeber piece is going to get into just how archaic games are, right? Uh, so like, it's very important to think about this stuff and sort of refine our thinking about this stuff. And as we just saw from that last video, like Martin Scorsese is a brilliant guy. I'm not sure that his perspective on what specifically is happening with Marvel movies is complete, right? Like I do think that our guy Grafton Tanner was onto some shit in that video. Where it's like Martin Scorsese is talking about these movies as an amusement park. I think we got to expand that notion out more. That it's more like he calls it an infinite game. Um, we're also talking about like role playing games in there. He's tying it into things like QAnon, right? And I think that that's the right move to make. But as you just heard, like I didn't necessarily agree with everything that he was talking about in there, and I think that there's more detail that we can bring to this subject, right? So let's start doing that with David Graeber. But before that, I'm going to give us a little bit of a break, and we'll be back in about 5 minutes. Okay, and we are back. Sorry, folks, I just had a little, little chore to take care of there. Little errand, sure. Whatever. Okay, so we just spent some time going over Kraft and Tanner's video about games, responding to Martin Scorsese's critique of Marvel movies as amusement parks. And he discussed the idea of these movies functioning more like games. Uh, he used the term infinite game in there. And he's written a book, a very interesting sounding book. After just seeing that video, I'm even more interested to check this book out. Um, his book Foreverism, all right? And he's written a lot of stuff. He seems to be a legit academic with some legit thoughts about things. I'm curious to know more about him specifically at some point. There's not, I was trying to see even like, does he have a doctorate? Does he, like what field specifically is he even like in? Like I'd love to know more about his education and how he's approaching this stuff. I know he has like something of a background in communications. Um, but yeah, really, really solid thinking here, really insightful stuff so far. I'm probably gonna have like if I go through this book, I'm probably gonna have some disagreements here and there with like specifics in here. But before we get into foreverism, I wanted to go over this David Graeber piece in the Baffler. This is from 2014. I remember reading this in undergrad originally, and this article specifically has just really stuck with me ever since. Um, I don't think we're gonna have time to go through the whole thing. It's a fairly lengthy article, but let me open that up for us right now so you can sort of see what I'm looking at. There we go. This is the this is the David Graeber piece. So I just want to go over enough of this so that we can sort of get a sense of what Graeber's point is and kind of how he's going to expand out this idea of play and what does it mean to play a game, right? So let's get into it. It's well written also. It says, my friend June Thunderstorm and I once spent half an hour sitting in a meadow by a mountain lake watching an inchworm dangle from the top of a stalk of grass, twist about in every possible direction, and then leap to the next stalk and do the same thing. They're watching this little bug. And so it proceeded in a vast circle, with with what must have been a vast expenditure of energy, for what seemed like absolutely no reason at all. We're watching this tiny little bug jumping from like one blade of grass to another, basically, and like do like a little wiggle, little jig, you know, and like jumps over to the next thing, like a little jig. Tiny little bug, so like proportionate to his size, he's covering a lot of ground, burning a lot of those bug calories, right? All animals play, June had once said to me, even ants. She'd spent many years working as a professional gardener and had plenty of incidents like this to observe and ponder. If you've spent any amount of time landscaping, you've seen some funny stuff like this. Like you just get like kind of stoned and watch bugs for a couple minutes, or like you're on your break or whatever. You see some wacky shit. Uh, she said with an air of modest triumph, see what I mean? She's basically saying that this inchworm, he's hanging out with his friend in the meadow, and and they see this bug jumping around, and he's like, He's playing. You know, look at this inchworm. He's goofing around. He's playing. Most of us hearing this story would insist on proof. How do we know the worm was playing? Perhaps the invisible circles it traced in the air were really just a search for some unknown sort of prey, or a mating ritual. Can we prove they weren't? Even if the worm was playing, how do we know this form of play did not serve some ultimately practical purpose? Exercise or self-training or some possible future inchworm emergency? This would be the reaction of most professional ethnologists as well, right? Generally speaking, an analysis of animal behavior is not considered scientific unless the animal is assumed, at least tacitly, to be operating according to the same means-ends calculations that one would apply to economic transactions. Chew on that a little bit. Chew on that a little bit. Under this assumption, an expenditure of energy must be directed towards some goal, whether it be obtaining food, securing territory, achieving dominance, or maximizing reproductive success, unless one can absolutely prove that it isn't. And absolute proof in such matters is, as one might imagine, very hard to come by. So basically, like what he's saying here is we have a tendency in a lot of different fields, not just biology, but he's talking specifically about ethnology here, like the study of human beings and human cultures. We have a tendency to presume that there's some kind of cost benefit analysis happening under the hood somewhere, driving every behavior. Right. That some mechanism within life itself or within this organism or what have you is sort of evaluating behavior, perhaps ahead of time or in the moment, and sort of restricting behavior such that the goal is always to maximize the output of that behavior, right? It should be working towards some goal, it should be working towards some end, right? And the suggestion that an organism might not be operating on those kinds of motivations is often dismissed, but demonstrating one way or another what kinds of motivation or how sort of like transactional the motivations of the organism are, it's very difficult to do. Right. That might not be a more clear way of saying what Graper just said, but it's at least a different way. So hopefully you're starting to get the flavor of what we're talking about here. We're really trying to examine this idea, why do organisms do things, right? And it's being framed within play. We're going to get at this idea of what motivates life by asking some questions about what motivates play, right? I must emphasize here that it doesn't really matter what sort of theory of animal motivation a scientist might entertain. What she believes an animal to be thinking, whether she thinks an animal can be said to be thinking anything at all. I'm not saying that ethnologists actually believe that animals are simply rational calculating machines. I'm simply saying that I'm sorry, I think I've been misreading this word. Ethologists. I'm not sure I even know what that is, which is embarrassing because I read this before and I probably read it as ethnology. Ethology is the science of animal behavior. That makes a lot more sense. That makes a lot more sense. I was reading this in a human context, and that actually broadens it. That's good. That's good. Okay. I'm simply saying that ethologists have boxed themselves into a world where to be scientific means to offer an explanation of behavior in rational terms, which means in turn, which in turn means describing an animal as if it were a calculating economic actor trying to maximize some sort of self-interest. Whether their theory of animal psychology or motivation, whatever their theory of, ah, whatever their theory of animal psychology or motivation might be. So let me get through that sentence one more time because I think I missed the cadence there. I'm simply saying that ethologists have boxed themselves into a world where to be scientific means to offer an explanation of behavior in rational terms, which in turn means describing an animal as if it were a calculating economic actor trying to maximize some sort of self-interest, whatever their theory of animal psychology or motivation might be. So basically, he's saying like, look, you don't have to be the kind of person that thinks that animals are just machines, and that every behavior has this, sort of rational calculation towards maximizing self-interest. You don't have to think that that's really what life is, but the terms of engagement that you've set up for yourself privileges those kinds of explanations, right? And makes it very difficult to even describe animal behavior without appealing to that sort of logic, right? That's why the existence of animal play is considered something of an intellectual scandal. It's understudied, and those who do study it are seen as mildly eccentric. As with many vaguely threatening speculative notions, difficult to satisfy criteria are introduced for proving animal play exists, and even when it is acknowledged, the research more often than not cannibalizes its own insights by trying to demonstrate that play must have some long-term survival or reproductive function. Despite all this, those who do look into the matter are invariably forced to the conclusion that play does exist across the animal universe, and exists not just among such notoriously frivolous creatures as monkeys, dolphins, or puppies, but among such unlikely species as frogs, minnows, salamanders, fiddler crabs, and yes, even ants, which not only engage in frivolous activities as individuals, but also have been observed since the 19th century to arrange mock wars, apparently just for the fun of it. Why do animals play? Well, why shouldn't they? The real question is, why does the existence of action carried out for the sheer pleasure of acting, the exertion of powers for the sheer pleasure of exerting them, strike us as mysterious? What does it tell us about ourselves that we instinctively assume that it is? This is what this article is trying to get into. Okay. And oh man, we should probably do the whole thing on stream at some point because this is a wonderful, wonderful article. The core thing that he's calling into question is right here, right? Why do we assume this? Why do we assume not even why do we assume any particular belief or position, but why do we already have this attitude, this disposition, this posture that says that frivolous, as he puts it, action done just for its own sake, a thing done just for its own sake, superfluousness, you might call it abundance or excess, right? This kind of like excessive behavior, to start hinting at Bataille a little bit. Why is this, why does it strike us humans of all creatures? Why does the idea that this would be out there in nature strike us as mysterious? It would almost seem more mysterious that this didn't happen, right? And part of what he's going to get into over the course of this article is the connections between this attitude and this disposition, um, and sort of our overall sort of like attitudes towards life and the sort of like cultural and ideological moment that we're in. It's very, very good stuff. Uh, we can see he's already, there's a call out to Peter Kropotkin right here. Kropotkin is great. We should definitely take some time with Kropotkin. Um, we're going to contrast this attitude against people like Richard Dawkins and the selfish gene. Sort of call out some of those assumptions, right? Um, there's so much in here. This is a very rich article with a lot of fascinating questions buried in it, and ones that I would love. I would love to see more people taking up these kinds of questions, honestly. Like, this is the sort of thing that I think, as individuals and as a society, it's very valuable stuff to study and to think about, especially the moment that we're in right now. What we're just seeing from Grafton Tanner, right? The role that play has in the modern world is profound, profound. And it's really hard to overstate the importance of play in the world that we're in right now, right? And a lot of us, I think, there's still not a lot of like general literacy amongst the public in terms of sort of like how play dynamics work and how that ends up getting expressed in society. Um, Frankly, there's not as much familiarity as I would like to see amongst pretty intelligent people, scholarly people and media critics and artists and so forth, people who would probably be very much enriched by this kind of thinking. Um, and yet this sort of thinking is very new. And so I hope as part of this stream to like help shout these kinds of ideas out and get the conversation boiling a little bit more and help provide a little bit of that basic literacy around this kind of media and these kinds of concepts, right? It's deep stuff. It's deep stuff, right? Like we were just talking about QAnon a minute ago and role playing, right? What exactly is the connection between perhaps an inherent orientation of humans towards displays of excessive behavior engaged in for its own sake, this kind of arbitrariness that can mm, guide a lot of our motivations, right? And how that gets expressed in something like QAnon, it's hard to say, right? But to say that there's no relationship there at all, I think is ludicrous. There's obviously a relationship, right? There's a relation, and it's going to be really important, right, going forward. I 100 years ago, there was some pretty dangerous fascist movement popping up all over the world. And at the time, we were dealing with some very new media technology in filmmaking. Now we're dealing with, a resurgence of a lot of these terrible ideas, and it's in the context of games, right? Like I think this is going to be an important thing to understand, like there are positives and negatives in all of this, and there are going to be ways that people are going to use games, just like people have used films throughout history to advance some ugly tendencies, and already have, right? So I think we can expect to see that kind of thing emerging more and more, and it's important to be aware and be able to think about these things, critique these things, break them down. All right, so I don't have too much more to go over today. Um, we've been streaming almost 2 hours now. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time going through the beginning of Foreverism by Grafton Tanner. I'm going through this sample and just sort of getting some of my thoughts out there for you guys. And then we're gonna wrap up and call it a stream because I gotta get moving with my day. So let's see. This is foreverism. We are starting with the very beginning here. One, when nothing ever ends. Section 17 of Hans Gross's 1911 book, Criminal Psychology, concerns the question of homesickness, which, he points out, is of essential significance and must not be undervalued. When studying the criminal mind, he maintains that I'm sorry, I stumbled that a little bit. Section 17 of Hans Gross's 1911 book, Criminal Psychology, concerns the question of homesickness, which he points out is of essential significance and must not be undervalued when studying the criminal mind. He maintains that if nostalgia cannot be relieved, it can fester in a person and make them murderous. This is already powerful. There's a lot that we could talk about here, right? His notion of nostalgia, I was hearing a little bit about it before. It's a very interesting exploration of nostalgia specifically, which I think is probably an underexplored subject in our current milieu, right? Um, we have a quotation here from Hans Gross. So then, if the homesick person is able, he tries to destroy his nostalgia through the noisiest and most exciting pleasures. If he is not, he sets fire to a house, or in case of need, kills somebody. In short, what he needs is explosive relief. Such events are so numerous that they ought to have considerable attention. This is interesting. I wonder if could we make like this explosive relief, right? Is there a relationship there to maybe the kind of thing that David Graeber was describing, right? The inform, the animal play, right? Maybe not the exact same thing, but perhaps a relation. It feels like there's a at the very least a kind of aesthetic relationship there. Let me make this a little bit bigger and easier for folks to see. So Grafton Tanner says again, the early 20th century produced a plethora of opinions on the nostalgia reaction, and Hans Gross was not the only positivist to link the emotion with criminality. Carl Jaspers contributed his own assumptions in his 1909 dissertation, writing about a young maidservant in 1795 who moved away from home to pursue work but eventually burned down her place of employment because she was homesick. Fascinating. Fascinating, fascinating. Now, and like the context here too is that we're talking about, poor people in the late 18th century. Very common that people leave home in order to go work on some wealthy estate, right? Uh, so this young woman, this young maidservant, you know, presumably doesn't have a whole lot of choice in the matter to go like move away and work in some wealthy person's estate, and she ends up burning the place down due to homesickness. At least that's what Carl Jaspers assigns that to. Right. In 1922, psychiatrist Maximilian Brzezowski, all right, Brzezowski? Yeah, Maximilian Brzezowski told the story of a maid who murdered her 4-year-old charge because killing the child was the only way she could leave work and return home. Damn. Ernst Kretschmer, the German psychiatrist who developed the classification system matching body types with personality traits, also made the connection in 1934. So these are all like old-timey psychiatrist types, okay? Like these stories are coming to us from early 20th century psychology bros who are like pondering the cases of like working class people in conditions that they don't really want to be in, doing jobs that maybe they don't really want to do, who miss home horribly and you know, commit crimes and do acts of violence in order to potentially change the game board that they're playing on. You know what I mean? Um, this is fascinating. Right? This whole era. And I don't imagine that these psychiatrists are going to be too charitable towards um, what these folks are going through. Yeah, Ernst Kretschmer, the German psychiatrist who developed a classification system matching body types with personality traits. So he's already a little bit of a kook in the way that old-timey German psychiatrists would be. Right? Like, let me measure your skull and associate that with your personality. Yeah, it's already a character, like understand this guy is of a generation where the head of state in Germany, the Kaiser, when he was a child, would have he had like a short limb, like I think his arm was a little bit too short, and he might have like walked funny or something like that. Um, he's just like born weird and had like you know, some issues, like some asymmetries or whatever in his body. They would strap this kid into like all kinds of like vices and like strap his arm to like a board and shit like for hours a day and like all kinds of like crackpot medicine basically to like try to get this young Kaiser to be normal. It, surprise, it didn't work. He started World War One. Um, but yeah, no, this is like top of the line medicine at the time too. So like man, late 19th century medicine was in a rough place. I think we really, really underestimate sometimes just how much medicine evolved just from like the period of like the end of like from the period really from like the beginning of World War One to the end of World War Two, like medicine jumped so far ahead of where it was. Like there's there's so much crackpot stuff happening like right up until World War One. Like a lot of the stuff that we associate with modern medicine today, like a lot of it straight up just wouldn't even be possible without painkillers and the kinds of like drugs that people were being put on in World War One. Like a lot of that stuff starting in World War One and World War Two. And so like yeah, no, you wind back the clock just a little bit, and they're talking about vapors, man. Like there's some weird ass stuff, right? Like people forget phrenology was a goddamn like all the rage, like throughout the 19th century. Phrenology, like eugenics, right? Like all kinds of crazy, crazy stuff that people were trying to do, you know. So let's get a little bit of a sense. As you can tell, I'm going into this quote from Ernst Kretschmer with a bit of a bias, with a bit of a bias. And given that he's telling me that this is a guy behind a classification system matching body types and personality traits, perhaps Tanner might have a little bit of a bias as well going into this. But let's see what Ernst Kretschmer has to say about the nostalgia reaction. The nostalgia reaction in the form of arson and child murder is a typical syndrome in maidservants between the ages of 14 and 17. Oh, is it? Is it really a typical thing that that children taken from their families to serve as servants in the household of some aristocrat suffering God only knows what kinds of working conditions. Some of them kind of snap sometimes because they miss home so bad. Strange, couldn't be me. Let's see where this goes. Okay, the girls who exhibit it are usually infantile and weakly, with retarded pubescence in this lamb-like, timid, and autistic way. Such girls often exhibit schizoid features. Oh man, he's talking about nostalgia. Nostalgia. This is Ernst Kretschmer on nostalgia in 1934. I don't think they were making too much nostalgic content, I guess, in 1934. God damn. God damn. Like I knew they were curmudgeons, but this is an extra level of like just sort of like I don't even know what to call this kind of thinking. This condition that afflicted so many freaking European, intellectuals or whatever who studied people at the time. Like this is like a nasty take, dude. Like these are young girls separated from their families to go like work round the clock in some aristocrat's home. But yeah, they miss home. I don't think you need to put all this like retarded pubescence and infantile, weakly autistic, schizoid, lamb-like. Wow, man. I feel like Ernst Kretschmer might have had a run-in with a maidservant that like I don't know, like was he hitting on a child and she was like, "Nah, I'm not into it," and like freaked out and ran away? That's what that sounds like. That's what that sounds like. Not to speak ill of the dead, Ernst Kretschmer, but like, mm, I'm a little worried. I'm a little worried, my guy. Press on. Psychologist Edmund Smith Conklin will claim as late as 1935 that the homesick reaction can result in explosive or uncontrollable criminal actions, arson, and even murder. But he will surmise that nostalgia is declining thanks to the greater amount of travel and shifting of places of residence occurring in modern civilization. To prevent nostalgia from occurring, he will caution parents against against excessive petting and coddling, which develops parental fixations. Yeah, these people are freaks, man. By the early 20th century, nostalgia's threat was its power to turn an ordinary, agentic individual into a criminal. To the positivists, however, interesting. So he's associating this with positivism, which is a an intellectual phase that deserves a lot of critique. I don't think there are too many positivists out there nowadays. At least I freaking hope not. But it's worth exploring a little bit because like this idea of positivism it like overlaps with a lot of stuff that was going on in Europe intellectually around this time. Um, and like I could probably real quick tie that into like Kurt Gödel and Hilbert's program and Albert Einstein and like that kind of thinking as well, right? Um, I see this as sort of like the sort of like sociocultural hemisphere to Hilbert's program, if that makes sense. Um, it probably doesn't unless you know about Hilbert. So for y'all who know Hilbert, shouts out. For y'all who don't worry. We'll go over Hilbert on stream sometime. He was another interesting guy. Um, by the early 20th century, nostalgia's threat. Okay, so to the positivists, however, this came as no surprise. In his literature review of nostalgia, Willis H. McCann cites psychologist Karl Marx who did not think it strange that homesickness sometimes would cause crime. He explained that those who can relieve themselves of homesickness by committing a crime will do so unless restrained. Jeez, man. Earlier writings discussed the possibility that individuals from rural areas might be particularly vulnerable to nostalgia. Assistant Surgeon of the U.S. Army J. Theodore Calhoun, this is in 1864, presented a paper entitled Nostalgia as a Disease of Field Service. He argued that troops were dangerously at risk of contracting the disease and that it sometimes caused other diseases to spread, leading him to label nostalgia a complication to be dreaded as one of the most serious that could befall the patient. Calhoun said that soldiers from rural backgrounds were more susceptible to nostalgia because a country boy is more at home. The soldier from the city, on the other hand, is stronger and more mature. He cares not where he is or where he eats, while his country cousin pines for the old homestead and his father's groaning board. Wow. But it was on the battlefield, Calhoun declared, where rural men could really prove their manhood and thus cure their nostalgia. Bro, I like the way that this guy sets up stuff. Like Grafton Tanner, I feel like I like how he's using these examples, right? Like he's kind of building up this context that he's going to be responding to in this book. I can kind of already feel where we're going with this, right? Like we're building up this context, like what is nostalgia? And how have we thought about it historically? How is our thinking about nostalgia changing, right? The talk was popular. Let's see. Any influence that will tend to render the patient more manly will exercise a curative power. In boarding schools, as perhaps many of us will remember, ridicule is wholly relied upon and will often be found effective in camp. Unless the disease affects a number of the same organization, the patient can often be laughed out of it by his comrades or reasoned out of it by appeals to his manhood. That nostalgia, sissy. Yeah. You're not a real man. Real men don't miss their homes. Freaking wild, man. This is like let's see, this is a U.S. Army surgeon, assistant surgeon during the Civil War. So he's a surgeon for the Union, right? I mean, he's here to tell you like, hey guys, turns out a lot of soldiers really miss their homes, and they get kind of sad about it, and that has some negative impacts on like other things in their lives. So, let's just make sure that we bully them more. Let's just make sure that we laugh at them and question their manhood more. And people wonder why our country ended up like this, bro. Like this is great to see. Um, yeah, no, this is that kind of deep cultural material that leaves an impression on whole communities, right? The talk was popular. The medical surgeon reporter published it 2 weeks later, and excerpts appeared in Scientific American. Wow. Scientific American, by the way, we can go through that at some point. I used to have a subscription to Scientific American when I was a teenager. Ooh, cool science, right? Um, it's one of the most like I would argue one of the more kind of harmful publications in terms of public understanding of science, but yeah, that's a whole other bag of worms, okay? Um, Under the title Homesickness as a Malady, the Medical Society hosted a discussion on nostalgia with other Army physicians. Some noted lack of cleanliness was the first symptom of nostalgia. So, like, they're just sort of, people are really, so he's basically building the case for us. People are really interested in nostalgia at this time, and it's broadly seen as a problem, as a medical problem. nostalgia, a mental illness, right? Something that interferes with work, something that interferes with military service, something that encourages erratic behavior, and that generates all kinds of other associated symptoms, right? They're sort of treating nostalgia very much like how, people might treat depression, like it's a mental illness that can be pretty severe from their perspective and creates a lot of problems. And you know, we want to push people out of it as much as possible, right? And it seems that things like bullying have some positive impacts in curing people of nostalgia, as does trauma on the battlefield. Yeah, this is very interesting. It tells you a little bit about I mean, it tells you a lot about society, right? And the kind of society that we're dealing with here. This is America during its, sort of most ambitious expansionistic phases, right? America ascendant as this new economic and military power in the world. We're doing all kinds of stuff down in Latin America, etc. Wars gearing up in Europe, right? Like this is a very militarized time in Europe. There's a highly competitive military and economic environment just sort of around the world, especially in these established nations like the US, like Europe, right? And that world relies on huge amounts of very difficult labor, right? This is not nearly as like kind of mechanized and automated of a world as what we have today. Travel is a lot slower, communications are a lot slower, and so just to sort of do the kinds of projects that imperialism and colonialism and capitalism and all that stuff require means you really gotta like get a lot of bodies out there. You gotta put a bunch of people on a boat or ship them off somewhere to go like do a thing, and they're gonna be out there for a while. You're not gonna be able to go home for the weekends. You're not gonna have like a tidy 8-hour day and you clock out. No, like this is hard work, right? In the case of these maidservants, this is your life, right? When you're a soldier on campaign, this is your whole life, and a lot of work was like that for a lot of people for a long time throughout any kind of imperial project, right? Any kind of colonial project, any kind of expansionistic project, especially at this time, when you don't have convenient digital communications, you can't just call your family up. You get like a handwritten letter. If you and your family are both literate, you get like a handwritten letter every once in a while, you know? And like hopefully it makes it to you, right? And it might be expensive to even send. So like yeah, like it's very easy to see how a lot of people put in those kinds of circumstances start feeling horribly lonely, horribly isolated, and yeah, they're gonna miss their home something awful, man. Something awful. Especially if you're coming from, and they note this, right? Especially if you're coming from like a rural community, probably a somewhat more traditional community, a highly integrated community. A lot of these rural communities at this time would have been much more self-sufficient also. Like you don't have to go all the way out to like, the Walmart or something. You're not shipping a bunch of stuff in. A lot of these rural communities, like they're very contained within themselves. You have everything that you need there. You don't really need to work the same ways that you do. Like you have to work, but like, like there's an ease and rhythm to it. There's a way in which like the community all kind of supports each other in that. And there's, real familial bonds that persist there. Not to make it sound like it's always a good thing, like there are a lot of rural communities back in the 19th century that would have been really difficult places to live for darn sure. But compare that to like being on campaign, you know, like going to war, or like even just like compare that to like oh like I'm a 14-year-old girl in like the French Riviera, and then like my family has like fallen on hard times, and I need to take a job as like a maidservant in Paris or something in some rich fucker's estate. Like you bet there's gonna be some heavy nostalgia there. Like for a lot of these people. And it's something like it's like it finds its way into a lot of like poetry and literature and stuff too. People wrote about this stuff, you know? Like even if they themselves didn't see it, they would see it in the people around them and like, it's a powerful and compelling emotion. Even if the mainstream perspective is that this is a disease. Yeah, this is like I'm already convinced this is a very interesting book. Um, I definitely want to dig into it more and like know more because he's gonna start. Yeah, he starts getting into social media and branding. Let me just get these next two paragraphs in here. But I want to see where how he's gonna connect this up with sort of more contemporary trends, right? So he says anti-nostalgic positivists were the authors of a new genre of writing linked to the figure of abnormality with nostalgia, thus producing the idea of the nostalgic subject. A nostalgic subject became, in the words of Foucault, an individual to be corrected. Yeah, Foucault's I gotta get into some Foucault. He's got a lot of stuff and I've not read Foucault yet. I've been in like little bits, but I really want to familiarize myself more with his thinking. The one who is regular in his irregularity and appears to require correction because all the usual techniques, procedures, and attempts at training have failed to correct him. Non-conforming individuals, those who failed to adopt the identity of the progressive man of the Enlightenment, were routinely accused of backwardness. The early 20th century witnessed the emergence of the modern nostalgic subject, the longing, yearning individual in need of supercorrection. Fascinating. Over the course of the 20th century, a massive shift will occur. The opinions on nostalgia will be rearranged. Less than 100 years after Brusowski, Kretschmer, and Conklin. God damn, these white people. Sorry. Brusowski, Kretschmer, and Conklin linked nostalgia with criminality. Fabric Brands, an ad agency out of London, compiled a list of tips for companies to conduct successful nostalgia marketing campaigns. So something changed over the course of the 20th century. We go from these like anti-nostalgia positivists to now having big brands telling us, yo, here's how you can sell people with nostalgia. Here's how you can lean into nostalgia, leverage nostalgia, right? And there it is. What happened to nostalgia? So we could probably go through these points, right? It's this company, Fabric Brands, an ad agency out of London, and they've put together tips, 5 tips, right? Know your inspiration, keep your audience and personality in mind, pair nostalgia with social media, tap into brand history if you can, pay close attention to detail, right? So they're specifically talking about like ways to leverage nostalgia in marketing. So what happened to nostalgia? How did it go from a condition of abnormality, even criminality in the early 20th century to a marketing tactic today? Well, we obviously don't think nostalgia can cause a person to commit murder anymore, or advertising firms wouldn't encourage companies to use nostalgia in their marketing. The truth is, there actually isn't much of a difference between the words of the positivists and Fabric Brands. In fact, they're both trying to accomplish the same thing, the eradication of longing. Okay, okay, I need this book. You need this book. Yeah, yeah, I need this book. Nostalgia after the death of progress. Me tying this in with recent US presidential politics. Fascinating. We're gonna be looking at George Lucas in here. Okay, okay, okay. Okay, 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 okay. Okay, okay, okay. There's a lot of great stuff in this book. There's a lot of great stuff in this book. Yeah. Grafton Tanner, everybody. This seems like there's a lot of great stuff to learn about in this world. I don't even know what to say at this point. I'm glad I looked him up. I'm glad I looked him up. It seems like insightful work. It's not super expensive. So I'll take a look. I'll take a look and I'll get back to you guys when I have the chance to go over his stuff a little more. Oh man, he's got a debate on here also. Okay. We'll do that. We'll do that later. We'll do some more Graff and Tanner stuff because I think his work is really interesting and I want to understand it better. Um, for next time, we'll probably also dig into some David Graeber because I think that that Graeber article is it's so rich and I think it would be worth worth finishing that article on stream together and just kind of like spending some proper time with it. Um, and then let's see. I don't think there's too much more that I really wanted to touch on today. Just as I'm wrapping all of this up, just to sort of like make some notes for what my thinking is right now. We're gonna be, as I said earlier, I'm gonna be fairly busy for the next month or two, right? But once I'm done with the current semester, then I'll have a lot more chance to stream over the summer, hopefully, right? I'm also working on getting these streams edited and flipped and uploaded for folks. Hopefully, that'll be together soon. Um, video essays and stuff at some point, but really probably not going to get the chance to do too much of that sort of thing. It can be time consuming, right? And I do have a lot on my plate at the moment. But yes, we will do video essays. We will do some tutorials. I've started putting together some content on Frida specifically, and I think it makes sense to try to do a regular or semi-regular art stream and just spend some time in software, drawing, painting, talking about art theory, fundamentals, how I do what I do, why, right? And maybe kind of make that more of its own specific stream, a specialized stream, and kind of have like the discussion streams be slightly separated, right? I will probably still do things like read and draw at the same time, right? Um, but discussion and and creation, it's you kind of need to set off time to do one and then jump over to the other, right? And I don't really have a space in my schedule where I can really like commit to like a 3, 4, 5 hour stream and do like half the stream, drawing and painting, and then half the stream like reading and learning and all that kind of stuff. So we're gonna probably have those on like different days for now, right? Maybe something like Like maybe we'll do like drawing on Mondays and learning on Fridays or something. I don't know. We'll sort of figure out what makes the most sense as time goes on. I'm still not really promoting this, so these are more just sort of notes for posterity right now. Um, but at some point, the promotion of this work will amp up, and we just build up the platform from there. All right, everybody. So I'm gonna wrap it up at this point and move on with the rest of my day. Hopefully, if you've been around this long, appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed learning with me today, and yeah, yeah, keep your eyes on this channel. There's going to be more coming soon. Appreciate you folks. Have a great day.